Welcome. I'm Stephane Charitos, the Executive Director of the Consortium for Language Teaching and Learning. I'd like to welcome you to this event, to the Symposium on Language Education at a Time of Crisis, Adaptation, Transformation, Innovation. I want to say a few words about the consortium before we get started. The Consortium for Language Teaching and Learning is an association of like-minded institutions of higher education dedicated to the study, support, and promotion of second language at the post-secondary level. They consist of Columbia, Yale, Brown, Cornell, and the University of Chicago. Last year, we were lucky enough, after a brief hiatus, Princeton to rejoin the consortium. This year, we are welcoming MIT, and hopefully next year, we will be able to welcome back Harvard. The consortium advances its core mission in part by organizing symposia, conferences, and workshops that serve to enhance the quality of language teaching and learning on the member institution campuses, as well as encourage the professional development of current and future language faculty. Over the years, we've funded some outstanding proposals on topics as varied as the function and role of language centers, content-based instruction, community-based learning, and genre-based teaching. Just so that you know, the next workshop funded by the consortium will be held at Yale on October 25 and 26 of 2019, and it will explore the principles and the benefits of project-based learning for language teaching and learning. As the executive director of the consortium, I want to encourage the faculty at the member institution to consider submitting a proposal when the next RFP is out. As a reminder, the consortium makes funds annually available for the organization of a workshop in the fall and a symposium in the spring. So those of you who are part of the consortium, I look forward to your proposals, and I look forward to attending the events that you will host on your campuses. Before I introduce Dean Sarah Cole, who will officially open the symposium by saying a few words, let me switch hats here, and as director of the Language Resource Center at Columbia, let me thank, and as part of the organizing committee for the symposium, let me thank a few people. First and foremost, I want to thank my staff. There's a huge paradox here. They do all the work. I get all the credit. But I do want to thank each and every one of them for the hard work they've put in the organization and preparation of the symposium. The other pleasure you get in organizing symposia such as this one is being able to publicly recognize and thank those individuals and units whose generosity has made events such as this one possible. So with that in mind, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the co-sponsors whose financial contribution have made tonight's event possible. The Consortium for Language Teaching and Learning and the Language Resource Center, Columbia College, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences of Columbia University through the Office of the Executive Vice President, the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures, the Department of French and Romance Philology, the Department of Germanic Languages, the Department of Italian, the Department of Latin American and Iberian Cultures, the Department of Middle East, South Asian and African Studies, the Department of Slavic Languages, the American Language Program, the East Central European Institute, the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society, the Institute of Latin American Studies, the Program in Hellenic Studies, thank you, Nico, the Middle East Institute, the South Asia Institute, and last but not least, the Harriman Institute. So thank you to all of you. Your generosity is much appreciated. It's my real pleasure now to introduce Dean Sarah Cole. She will say a few words to open the symposium. Dean Cole is the Parr Professor of English and Comparative Literature at Columbia University. She is also the Dean of Humanities for the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Columbia.
So it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you to Columbia and to help introduce this important conference, Language Education in a Time of Crisis, Innovation, Adaptation, Transformation, hosted by the Language Resource Center at Columbia and co-sponsored by the Consortium for Language Teaching and Learning, as well as by that long list of departments, centers, and programs that you just heard about. It promises to be a fantastic set of events and conversations, and I'm really thrilled to have all of you here to think critically and creatively on this urgent topic, and especially to come in on an actually not raining and warm Friday evening, the first one we've had, I think, in like 6 months. So I don't have to tell this group how important languages and language teaching are. Language is everything. It is the carrier of our histories, our cultures, and our diversity. We think in and through language. Language is where we live. The knowledge of languages, their preservation, their capacity to thrive into the future, and their embeddedness in our understanding of cultures close to home, as well as far away from wherever our homes may be, are, in my view, central to what academia affords to the world beyond our campuses. As many of you know, for the last few years, Columbia has been hosting a Mellon Sawyer seminar on the subject of global language justice, whose premise is that we should treat the rapid disappearances of languages around the world with the same sense of urgency and with the same creative collaborative efforts as we use to think about the extinction of species. And I think many of us have the extinction of species on our mind this week, given the horrifying report put out by the UN earlier in the week. So those who are thinking about languages in the same spirit, and you, are right. These language traditions stand at the heart of who we are and how we want our future to look. I've been thinking a lot lately in regard to my own scholarship about what it would mean to have a unified global community or polity, under what auspices and with what meanings might the idea of totality be extended toward a planetary future of peace and prosperity? And if one wants to think at these large scales, how does language fit in? It's no coincidence, I think, that the great dystopias of the 20th century, like George Orwell's 1984, feature an extreme reduction in the capacity and knowledge and use of language. More specifically, as Dean of Humanities, I am painfully aware of the decline in language enrollments and the need to work, that is nationally, not specifically at Columbia, and the need to work energetically to uphold the teaching of languages as a basic aspect and value in our institutions. In that regard, I want to commend the Language Resource Center, as well as our many wonderful language departments and faculty members and graduate students who do a great deal of language teaching, for their wide-ranging and superb work. I'm immensely proud that Columbia is a national leader in language instructions. Students here can study from over 50 languages in a given semester. Our faculty are exceptional in creating innovative ways to teach languages at many different levels and to different kinds of learners, including with support from Arts and Sciences language support grants. I particularly want to take a moment to recognize the exceptional work of the Language Resource Center and its devoted director, Stephane Charitos. This is indeed an incredible resource, and he is a tireless and effective advocate. The Shared Course Initiative, which allows us to extend the teaching of less commonly taught languages in collaboration with our peers at Yale and Cornell, is an example of an especially promising kind of program, one that I hope can grow and can be a model to others. I will say that when people ask me about the humanities, as they tend to do nowadays, I often mention this program, since I honestly cannot think of a more valuable thing for us to be doing at Columbia than to be finding ways to teach these less commonly taught languages. I was thinking of having a whole thing about minor and major, but I didn't think I'd go there. But we used to call them minor languages, and I wanted to say, yes, I embrace the minorness. As an administrator, I'm often pressed on the issue of small classes, diminishing number of majors, dwindling enrollment, and following on all of this numerical accounting, the question of whether all of this still matters. Luckily, when it comes to this question, it's actually not difficult to answer. I can defend what you and we all do with passion and say, yes, it does matter. Perhaps it matters more than anything. So let me welcome you again to this conference, and for those of you from out of town, to New York City and to Columbia, and extend to all of you my warmest thanks for your contribution to learning. It's a paradox, perhaps, but an enabling one to say that in studying, preserving, and carrying forward our shared past in the form of languages, we create our desired future. Thank you, and have a great conference.
Unfortunately for you, I thought I could just turn this over to the keynote speaker, but I was told, no, you're going to have to frame the symposium. So you're going to have to bear with me for 5 to 7 minutes. As I say a few things about the theme of the symposium. I presume everyone is familiar by now with the latest report published by the MLA on foreign language enrollments. For those of you who might not be, let me highlight 3 of its key findings. First, the data collected conclusively shows that enrollments in college-level foreign language courses are on a constant and steady decline nationwide. They have fallen by 9.2% between 2013 and 2016, and this drop comes on the heels of a further 6.7 reduction or decline detailed in the previous report. Secondly, this decline is now affecting virtually all languages, including major languages such as Spanish and French, which had previously been thought to be immune to this downward pressure. And finally, the report reveals that the downturn is having a significant negative impact on the institutional viability of language programs. While we won't know the exact numbers or the exact figure until the final version of the report is released, preliminary indications are that between 2013 and 2016, over 650 language programs have closed across the nation, with French, Spanish, German, and Italian accounting for 60% of all these closings. Although it's always possible, as some have done, to bicker over the finer points of the methodology used to collect the data, or quibble as to what exactly constitutes a program, the conclusion that should be drawn from these findings is as stark as it is inescapable. Namely, that language education in this country is in a serious state of crisis. If this is indeed the case, then one question we ought to ask ourselves must surely be, what are we as a language professional, as a language community, and as institutions to do about this state of affairs? Some would advocate simply doing very little, or even nothing. After all, they argue, we as a profession have always had to deal with crises, and crisis is a notion that has always been at the very center of our reality and of our lexicon. If we can simply hold on and wait for the storm to pass, the reasoning goes, things will surely sort themselves out as they always have in the past. For these proponents of stoic resignation, valleys always rise back to peaks as surely as night gives way to day. And in a few years, this crisis will be nothing more than another bad memory. I am not one of these people, and doing nothing, in my opinion, is not an option. If we ignore this crisis in the hope that it eventually blows over, we do this at our own peril, since I firmly believe that what we are being confronted with is the emerging ramification of deeply rooted structural imbalances that can no longer be ignored or explained away as passing aberrations. It is a situation that cries out for action on our part. In a series of talks I've been giving around the country in the last couple of years, I've outlined an approach that I believe would allow us to address this watershed moment. The approach is dependent on 4 mutually reinforcing axes of action, such that progress in one inevitably advances progress in all of the others. To quickly enumerate them, these axes are information, advocacy, collaboration, and innovation. In the next day and a half, we will focus our attention on one of these axes, innovation. All the presentation you will hear, starting with the keynote tonight and ending with Francis Holt's closing address tomorrow, address the various ways that language programs can, and more importantly should, adapt, transform, and innovate to attend to the challenges posed by the language crisis. The talks you will hear highlight current and future initiatives that seek to increase enrollments and strengthen language programs in a number of ways. These include adapting curricular models and pedagogical practices to respond to shift in language pedagogy, transforming programmatic emphasis to conform to the realities of language usage in today's mobile and globalizing world, and imagining innovative collaboration that cross departmental lines, disciplinary limits, and institutional boundaries so as to make language study more accessible, more relevant, and more interesting to our students. While these efforts are not and should not be judged as a panacea for the ills that confront us, they are nonetheless the beginning of a response to what is, without a doubt, a bellwether moment for the profession as a whole. I want to conclude for personal reminiscence and a final word of caution. When I was young and living in France, my parents would often have some of my father colleagues over for dinner. I remember one of them in particular, a fairly well-known French biologist, won the Nobel Prize, who argued passionately that life was essentially change. In order to survive and thrive, he alleged, all living organisms had to adapt to the changing conditions of their ecosystems. Transformation was life. Stasis, or the lack of change, was, in his words, the equivalent of death. I believe that if we are to survive the current crisis, we as a profession must also learn to adapt to the changing condition of our own ecosystems, or risk becoming irrelevant. However, as the offspring of two academics, and as someone who has been associated with academia all of his professional life, I know from personal experience that it is often easier for academics to study change than to undergo it themselves. However, if we are to find a way out of our current predicament, and if language learning is to have a future in the university of tomorrow, it is essential that we embrace change rather than simply talk about it. Thank you.